30 million people held their breath. On live television, America watched Luke Spencer marry Laura in what became the most viewed daytime drama episode of all time. The bride in that white dress, Genie Francis, was just 19, crowned America's sweetheart overnight. To the world, it was romance, destiny, a fairy tale, but to Genie, it was something else entirely. Because the love story that made history was born from darkness. At just 17, she was asked to play a scene where Laura is assaulted, then told to gaze at her attacker with longing eyes, as if it were love. The audience celebrated, the network cheered, and the pressure on her shoulders grew heavier with every applause. No one asked if she was okay. No one questioned if it was right. Can you imagine being a teenager, forced to sell your own violation as entertainment for millions? That moment would define her life for decades, not as freedom, but as a prison. This is not just the story of a soap opera icon. It is the tragedy of Genie Francis, a young woman nearly destroyed by the very role that made her unforgettable. Before she became Laura Spencer, Genie Francis was simply a teenager from Englewood, New Jersey. Born into a modest family in 1962, she grew up shy, imaginative, and with a spark her parents couldn't ignore. Her father, a stage actor, often rehearsed lines at home, and Genie would quietly mimic him, unaware that she was planting the seeds of her own destiny. At just 14, she began auditioning for television roles, stepping nervously into studios filled with bright lights and sharper expectations. Casting directors noticed her natural softness, her ability to look both vulnerable and strong at once. By 17, she landed the role of Laura on General Hospital. It seemed like a dream, a young girl given the chance to shine on one of the biggest shows in America. But Genie was still a child at heart. While her peers went to prom, she memorized scripts. While her friends laughed about crushes, she was thrust into storylines far darker than her years could comprehend. No one handed her a manual on how to survive fame. They simply told her to smile for the cameras. What began as opportunity quickly became something else, a door that opened not to freedom, but to a labyrinth from which she would struggle to escape. By the late 1970s, the fictional romance of Luke and Laura had become a national obsession. Viewers rearranged their afternoons to watch General Hospital, and when their wedding aired in 1981, more than 30 million people tuned in, the highest-rated daytime drama episode in history. For millions, Genie Francis was no longer an actress. She was Laura, the golden girl who embodied every hope, every fantasy of love against the odds. Magazine covers, fan mail, interviews, Genie's face was everywhere. She was branded America's sweetheart, a title meant to honor her, but one that soon felt like a cage. Stardom demanded perfection, flawless hair, a constant smile, no weight gain, no mistakes. The schedule was brutal. 18-hour workdays began at dawn, leaving no space for school dances, friendships, or even quiet moments of being a teenager. The irony was sharp. While the world adored Laura, Genie herself was disappearing. Friends drifted away, unable to keep up with her locked-in routine. Even family saw less of her as she became swallowed by scripts and cameras. To fans, she was a dream come true. To Genie, she was a girl, slowly vanishing behind a character who seemed more real to the public than she did to herself. The romance that turned Genie Francis into a household name carried within it a disturbing truth. In 1979, General Hospital introduced a scene where Luke assaulted Laura. What began as violence was quickly rewritten by the network as the start of a great love story. Viewers were encouraged to cheer, to believe that this was passion. But behind the scenes, a 17-year-old actress was being told to turn her character's fear into desire. Genie was instructed to look at her attacker with soft, longing eyes. "The audience likes it," producers repeated. No one paused to ask if she was comfortable, if she understood what she was being asked to perform. For a teenager still finding her place in the world, it was disorienting and deeply damaging. She later admitted she felt lost, unsure of what was real, and silenced in an environment where ratings mattered more than her humanity. To the audience, it was a fairy tale. To Genie, it was exploitation disguised as love. That storyline did not just change daytime television, it blurred her understanding of intimacy, leaving wounds that would take decades to name. The tragedy was not only on screen but etched into the young woman forced to carry it. By 1981, the pressure had become unbearable. Genie Francis, barely out of her teens, was working 18-hour days, living under a microscope, and carrying the weight of a character who had eclipsed her own identity. In the shadows, she turned to alcohol and drugs, temporary escapes from a world that refused to see her as human. One night, the escape nearly cost her life, landing her in the hospital after a dangerous spiral. But Hollywood's response was chilling. The very next day, she was told to return to work immediately, as though nothing had happened. A colleague even relayed a devastating remark. "It doesn't matter if you live or die, Tony is the whole show." Imagine hearing that at 19, fresh out of a hospital bed. The message was clear: she was disposable. That moment shattered her. Leaving General Hospital was not a calculated career move. It was an act of survival, a desperate attempt to reclaim even the smallest sense of self-worth. Genie later admitted she was angry, reckless, determined to prove a point, even if it meant walking away from everything she had built. Her departure marked not liberation, but a young woman's cry against an industry that had convinced her she was nothing. For many, the story might have ended with bitterness, a star discarded, remembered only for a role that once defined her. But Genie Francis chose a different path. In her 50s, something shifted. She stopped apologizing for aging, for carrying scars, for being more than the sweetheart the world once demanded. She began speaking openly about her struggles, reclaiming her narrative from the silence that had trapped her for decades. She no longer tried to freeze Laura in 1981, the wide-eyed bride in a white dress. Instead, she portrayed a woman who had lived, who had endured, who had earned her lines and wrinkles. Genie redefined Laura not as a fantasy, but as a reflection of truth, resilient, imperfect, and deeply human. This act of reclamation was survival. It was proof that she could not be erased, no matter how often the industry tried to write her off. Fans who had grown older alongside her found comfort in seeing Laura age too, no longer a porcelain doll, but a mirror of real life. In breaking free from the prison of her past, Genie forged a legacy not of tragedy alone, but of endurance, courage, and authenticity. Genie Francis's story is not just about one actress, it is a mirror held up to an industry that too often consumes young women, sells their pain as entertainment, and discards them when they no longer fit a fantasy. The tragedy is not only that Laura's fairy tale was built on a foundation of exploitation, but that the real woman behind the character was nearly broken by it. And yet, the most remarkable part of Genie's journey is her survival. At 63, she has reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her life. She no longer seeks permission to exist outside of Laura, nor validation from a system that once told her she didn't matter. Instead, she has chosen peace, speaking honestly about what it cost her, and refusing to let silence define her anymore. Her legacy is more than a wedding episode that drew 30 million viewers. It is the quiet strength of someone who endured the unendurable and found her way back to herself. But her story also leaves us with questions. Has Hollywood truly changed, or are today's young actresses still facing the same impossible demands that once crushed Genie Francis? If her story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the industry has learned, or is history repeating itself? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and join us as we uncover more untold truths behind the stars we thought we knew.